We are commencing legal action against Mrs. Meghan Markle. Her televised allegations, particularly the Oprah interview, have inflicted undue harm upon the royal family. An apology no longer suffices. The matter will now proceed through the...
At the stroke of midnight, while the whole of Britain lay asleep, a signature was quietly affixed. And just hours later, Meghan Markle's position within the royal system would never be the same again. There was no urgent announcement, no cameras, no last-minute negotiations. There was only King Charles III, a senior constitutional advisor, and a prepared document resting on the table. The king picked up his pen. He paused for a few seconds. Then he signed. The decree did more than just terminate the official use of the remaining royal titles associated with Meghan. It paved the way for a cascade of changes affecting ceremonial lists, invitations, palace records, diplomatic protocols, and even future royal appearances. Yet the most striking detail lay not in the words on the page. Charles did not look like a man who had just won a victory. He sat motionless, gazing at his signature, seemingly aware that in the very act of defending the boundaries of the crown, he might have just driven his youngest son further away than ever before. Outside the room, an aide received a coded signal confirming the decree was finalized. The next call was made immediately. The recipient was Prince William. And just minutes later, Harry would hear the news he had fought to prevent until the very last moment. But Harry didn't ask how many pages long the decree was, nor did he ask what Meghan stood to lose. He wanted to know only one thing. Did my father really sign it himself? If you love royal stories filled with secrets, power, and decisions that can alter the course of a family, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part. And before we dive deeper, tell me, where are you following this story? From which city or country?
And now we have a story coming in that King Charles has given a warning basically to Harry and Meghan, apparently, on what she's banned from doing. Now, obviously, there's these fears, as this article says, from closer here, that the Sussexes could return and cause a descent into chaos. Charles has made it clear that Meghan Markle must play by his rules or all bets are off.
But to understand why King Charles arrived at such a drastic decision, we must look back to the time before that midnight signature for the decree did not emerge from a single argument, nor was it the result of a fit of anger. For months, tensions between Meghan Markle and the palace had been quietly mounting. The issue was no longer simply a matter of whether Meghan would retain a title. The debate had expanded to encompass the public use of titles, commercial branding security requirements, protocol regarding royal ceremonies, and above all, a question the palace found increasingly difficult to sidestep. To what extent could Meghan continue to leverage her former status? After stepping down from official royal duties, Charles had hesitated to provide a definitive answer. He understood that any heavy-handed move might be perceived by Harry as a direct attack on his wife. But then an incident at St. George's Chapel changed everything. It was intended to be a private memorial service, an occasion where the family was expected to set aside their differences. Yet, as the service concluded, Meghan realized she had not been included in the official family procession. She immediately sought out a senior palace official. Meghan wanted to know why. Her argument was that ceasing to be a working royal did not automatically erase the historic position she had gained through her marriage to Harry. For Meghan, this was not merely about the order of precedence in a ceremony. It was a matter of recognition. Before the official could offer a full explanation, however, someone else overheard the exchange. Princess Anne. Anne stepped forward. No anger, no raised voice. But her words instantly shifted the atmosphere. Anne made it clear that no title could supersede the monarch's prerogative. Matters of precedence were not determined by personal sentiment or an individual's own interpretation of their status. Meghan did not back down. She countered that history could not be rewritten simply because the palace found her presence inconvenient. For a few moments, the two women stood facing each other. There was no shouting, but this was no longer a minor disagreement over positioning in a procession. It had become a clash between two fundamentally different views of royal authority. Anne ultimately issued a warning. If status continued to be used to challenge the boundaries set by the crown, the monarch would be forced to resolve the issue once and for all. Meghan did not press the argument further at the chapel, but she did not let the matter drop. Subsequently, a formal written request was sent to the palace, asserting that Meghan's historic status could not simply be diminished by arbitrary decisions. And it was that very document that eventually landed on Charles's desk. The following morning, the monarch read it in private. He went through the pages until he paused at a particular argument. The palace could not simply strip Meghan of her royal status in a manner she deemed to be beyond their authority. Charles read the line again, once, then a second time. He did not fly into a rage, nor did he call Harry. Instead, Charles placed the document on the table and issued a brief directive to his aides. Examine the entire legal basis. From that moment on, the nature of the dispute shifted. It was no longer a question of what Meghan wished to retain. It became a question of what the crown actually had the authority to take away. And once the review was complete, his advisors laid out a path for Charles, one he had long been reluctant to take, a path that could resolve the ambiguity with a single decision. But before Charles put pen to paper, two members of his family would force him to confront an even more uncomfortable truth. Prince William and Princess Anne. Two men, two different approaches. Yet ultimately, both led King Charles to the same conclusion. The legal review Charles had requested did not take long to alter the nature of the crisis. When his advisors returned, they did not bring back a vague answer. They had found a way forward. According to the conclusion presented to the king, the crown could exercise its authority to terminate the official recognition and use of Meghan's remaining titles within the palace system. That meant the most difficult question had shifted. It was no longer, can Charles do it? But rather, does Charles actually dare to do it? William believed the answer could not be put off any longer. In his discussions with his father, he did not dwell on the past. He spoke of the future. One day, Charles would no longer be the one dealing with this issue. That responsibility would pass to his successor. And if the boundaries remained ambiguous, William believed the same dispute would resurface in a different form. His argument was that the crown could not indefinitely sustain a situation where someone had stepped away from official duties, no longer bound by the constraints placed on working royals, yet could still leverage royal status whenever it offered influence, recognition, or access. For William, this was no longer just about Meghan. It was a question of principle one that would outlast everyone in that room. Yet William also drew a line. He did not want Meghan erased from the family history. She remained Harry's wife. She remained the mother of Archie and Lilibet. They remained part of those private relationships that no decree could pretend did not exist. What William wanted to end was the institutional connection, not the family bond. Charles listened but had not yet made a final decision. Then Princess Anne entered the discussion. While William looked toward the future challenges facing the crown, Anne focused squarely on the rules being tested in the present. She placed a carefully marked report before Charles. One section concerned the use of titles. Another dealt with the right to participate in ceremonial duties. A third addressed the right to public representation. But Anne focused on an issue greater than all of these: consistency. She told Charles that a rule is only valid if it holds firm, even in the most difficult times. If family ties, personal pressures, or the fear of public backlash could constantly create exceptions, then sooner or later, the rule itself would lose all meaning. Charles looked down at the pages before him. He understood that William was asking him to safeguard the future. Anne was asking him to uphold principle. Yet both were forcing him to confront the same truth. For a long time, Charles had believed that delay might preserve a chance for reconciliation with Harry. Now, however, that very delay was making the boundary between family and crown increasingly blurred. And for the first time, the king seemed to accept that inaction was in itself a decision. But there was still one person Charles could not overlook. Before the decree was laid on the table at midnight, he wanted to look his son in the eye and give Harry one last chance. No William, no Anne, no advisors. There was only a father, a son, and a file lying between them. The final meeting was set for Windsor. No one knew exactly how long that conversation would last. There were no advisors accompanying Charles. No secretary sat taking notes. No telephone sat on the table. And there was no media team waiting outside for a statement. There was only King Charles III and Prince Harry. One was the monarch. The other was his youngest son. Between them lay a dossier containing the final options regarding Meghan's official position within the royal system. Harry walked in believing there was still room for negotiation. Charles had read almost everything his advisors had placed before him. For the first few seconds, neither man touched the dossier. The silence in the room weighed heavier than any accusation. Finally, Charles spoke. He told Harry that the issue was no longer about personal feelings, or who felt they had been treated unfairly. In Charles's view, royal identity always came with certain limitations. If a person no longer performed official duties for the crown, yet could still leverage their royal status to gain influence, access, or public advantage, the line between a private role and royal authority would become increasingly blurred. Charles raised issues the palace had long debated: commercial influence, public statements, access to ceremonial events, and the risk that any personal action might be perceived as carrying the implicit endorsement of the crown. Harry listened to it all, but he did not accept the argument. His voice began to tighten. Harry argued that the palace was taking a family conflict and turning it into a public punishment for Meghan. As he saw it, Meghan had stepped away from her official role. She had left the very system the palace sought to protect. So why did the system still need to take away one final symbol? Charles did not react with anger. He simply stated that stepping away from official duties could not mean retaining all the symbolic power while being exempt from the constraints attached to it. Harry leaned forward. Then he asked the question Charles likely knew was coming. Is this really about Meghan, or are you punishing me for leaving? Charles fell silent for a few seconds. He acknowledged that Harry's departure had changed a great deal, but he refused to accept that the decree was an act of retaliation. Then Charles pulled a file toward him. He opened it, and for the first time, Harry saw the final option. Meghan could voluntarily relinquish her remaining titles before the decree was officially issued. If Meghan agreed, the palace could present the decision as an arrangement, not an imposed action, not a public stripping of titles, but a consensual conclusion. Harry didn't even need much time to think. He refused immediately. To Harry, it wasn't a real choice. It was merely a forced surrender wrapped in the language of dignity. Charles removed his glasses. He rubbed his eyes and said very slowly that if Meghan did not voluntarily step down, he would have no choice but to proceed with the decree. Silence fell over the room again. Harry stood up. He walked toward the door. But before leaving, Harry paused. His hand still rested on the door. He didn't turn all the way around. Then he asked his father one final question. Are you really prepared to choose the crown over your own son? Charles looked at Harry, but he did not answer. And it was that very silence that made the question more painful than any answer could have been. Harry opened the door and left. Charles remained alone with the file before him. But if he thought that had been the hardest question of the night, he was mistaken. For shortly thereafter, someone else would ask Charles almost the same thing, only in a gentler way. Queen Camilla wanted to know if he was truly prepared to lose Harry completely. She didn't ask the moment Charles left the meeting at Windsor. She waited. She waited until the two of them were alone in the room. No advisors, no documents being read aloud, no one standing close enough to overhear the answer. Camilla looked at Charles for a long moment, then asked a simple question. If this decree drove Harry away from him completely, could he accept it? Charles didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the stack of documents before him, as if the answer lay somewhere within those pages. But this time, no clause could help him. No constitutional advisor could define the distance between a father and his son. Finally, Charles acknowledged that the risk was real. He knew Harry might view this decision not as an institutional boundary, but as a personal rejection. He also knew Meghan might see it as proof that the palace had never truly accepted her. But Charles said he no longer believed that delay would save the relationship. It would only prolong the conflict. At another moment, as Charles prepared to sign an approval page regarding the implementation process, Camilla stood nearby. She saw his hand pause. Just for a second. Harry's name appeared in the explanatory notes. Charles didn't turn the page. He stared at the name longer than necessary. Camilla gently reminded him that while the entire document before him might be a matter of policy, the name on the page was still his son. Charles didn't argue. He simply continued signing. And it was that silence which showed he understood exactly what she had said. While the king grappled with the personal cost of the decision outside the room, the palace machinery had already begun to move. Website teams were placed on standby. Ceremonial lists were already marked up. The new correspondence was ready. Diplomatic offices had been notified that a significant change might be announced within the next few hours. But not a single document was permitted to be made public before the appointed time. Not a single line of text could be altered prematurely. Not a single announcement was allowed to leak. Everything had to happen simultaneously. Prince William also issued a very clear directive to the team preparing the announcement. No triumphalist language was to be used. No wording should create the impression that the palace was celebrating the further distancing of Harry and Meghan. For William, the goal was clarity, not humiliation. It was an institutional boundary, not an act of familial retaliation. Charles agreed. Yet it was precisely this caution regarding language that made the situation feel all the heavier. For everyone present understood that no matter how gently the announcement was phrased, the consequences would be profound. An aide entered the room. He placed the final set of documents on the table. Then he checked his watch. All departments were ready. The website was ready. The protocol was ready. The diplomatic channels were ready. The correspondence was ready. Only one thing was missing. The king's signature. The effective time was confirmed one last time. Midnight. Charles looked up. No one said another word. And so the story returned to the very place it had begun. The room was silent. The pen lay beside the dossier. Britain was asleep. Charles picked up the pen. This time he did not hesitate. The signature was affixed. The decree officially took effect. But while the palace began altering the records in the shadows elsewhere, Meghan had yet to realize what had vanished. That happened just a few hours later, as dawn began to break, and as a screen appeared before her, a personal invitation from Charles still stood. That detail caused the room to fall silent. For hours prior, Meghan had witnessed signs that her official standing within the royal system was being dismantled so rapidly that she had barely any time to react. The website had changed. The list of ceremonial duties had been updated. Guidelines for official correspondence no longer used the familiar forms of address. Diplomatic offices had received new instructions. Any single change might have looked like nothing more than an edited line of text. But when they all happened at once, their significance became unmistakable. The decree was no longer sitting on Charles's desk. It had been put into effect. Meghan remained seated at her computer. She asked her assistant to reopen every section that had just been modified. Not just one page, all of them. She read very slowly, line by line, entry by entry. She paused at the spot where the old form of address used to appear. No one in the room said a word. Then she closed her laptop. Her first question wasn't for the palace. It was for Harry. Did you know exactly when this was going to happen? Harry didn't answer immediately. Eventually, he admitted he knew the decision was imminent. He knew Charles had prepared the decree, but he had truly believed his father wouldn't finalize everything without one last conversation. Meghan looked at him. Then she asked a second question. Who was told beforehand? This time, Harry's silence lasted longer. He knew the answer would only make things worse. But in the end, he said it. William had received confirmation before them. Meghan didn't scream. That very fact made her reaction feel all the heavier. She stood up, walked to a nearby cabinet, and pulled out an old file. Inside lay traces of a different life. Formal invitations, thank you notes, personal memos, documents bearing forms of address that had since vanished from official records. Meghan turned the pages one by one, not because she thought the past could alter Charles's decision, but because those documents stood as proof that she had once held a place in that world. Now, in the span of just a few hours, the palace was redefining that position. Anger began to rise. Meghan considered issuing an immediate public statement. A statement forceful enough to make it clear she did not accept the way the decision had been made. Harry held her back. He pointed out that they did not yet know the full legal ramifications of the decree. A hasty reaction could turn their anger into something the palace might use to slam shut any remaining doors. Meghan didn't like the advice, but she understood it. Then an aide spoke up. There was one thing that hadn't been erased. A personal invitation from Charles. Not a ceremonial invitation. Not a state event. Not a meeting flanked by advisors. It was a personal line of communication that remained open. Meghan studied that information longer than she had the lines just altered on the website. For the first time since the decree took effect, she faced a choice that wasn't being made for her by the palace. She could react immediately. She could take the fight public, or she could hear directly from the man who had signed that decree. Not through William, not through Harry, not through lawyers, just Charles and Meghan. And that conversation will determine whether this crisis shifts into a new battle, or finally comes to an end. And finally, Meghan chose to listen to Charles. For the first time since the crisis began, there were no intermediaries between King Charles and Meghan. Once the connection was established, both fell silent for a few seconds. Charles did not address Meghan by her former title, nor did Meghan use the formal style of address reserved for the monarch. The layers of formality that once existed between them seemed to have vanished along with the title itself. Charles spoke first. He told Meghan there was one thing she needed to understand. The decision that had just taken effect was not intended to erase her from the family. It could not erase her marriage to Harry. It could not erase the fact that she was the mother of Archie and Lilibet. And certainly, it could not rewrite the years she had been part of the family's history. According to Charles, all he was ending was the official recognition by the crown. The family and the institution, he said, were not always one and the same. But Meghan did not accept that distinction so readily. She told Charles that on paper, he might be able to separate the two into entirely different concepts. But the public would not see it that way. When a title vanishes overnight from websites, correspondence ceremonies, and official documents, the message received by millions is simple. Meghan no longer belongs there. Charles did not interrupt. He let her finish speaking. Then, for the first time in the conversation, the king acknowledged something he had previously tried to avoid facing. The royal family had allowed the conflict to drag on for too long. Disagreements that should have been resolved earlier had hardened into mistrust. Mistrust had turned into resentment. And ultimately, almost every action taken by one side was viewed by the other as an attack. A long silence followed. Then Meghan made a decision that Charles had not anticipated. She would not sue. There would be no drawn-out legal battle, no years-long effort to force the crown to restore the recognition that the decree had just revoked. But Meghan made one thing clear. This was not a surrender. She simply did not want to spend the rest of her life fighting for validation of her identity from an institution she had already left behind. She would accept that the official status was over, but she would not apologize for choosing independence. Charles exhaled slowly. There was no sense of triumph in his voice, only a mix of relief and regret. But Meghan had one more request, and this time it wasn't about her. Archie and Lilibet. Meghan asked Charles to ensure the children would not become targets in this dispute. They must not be held responsible for their parents' choices. And no decision involving the crown Harry and Meghan was to be used to undermine their private standing within the family. Charles answered almost immediately. His grandchildren would not pay the price for the adults' decisions. The call ended shortly after. No grand apology. No miraculous reconciliation. No one changed their mind. But the fight had stopped. Meghan stepped away from the phone. Harry was waiting nearby. He looked at her as if wondering if a new legal battle was about to begin. Meghan looked at her husband for a long moment. Then she said just 4 words, "It's over." But outside that room, things were actually just beginning. For while Meghan and Charles chose to close the chapter on their private confrontation, the sun was beginning to rise over Britain. Newsrooms had received the word. Broadcasters were preparing to alter their schedules, and in just a few minutes, a decision signed in silence at midnight will become a subject of national debate. And then the sun rose. From that moment on, the story no longer belonged to closed rooms, secure calls, or dossiers sitting on the king's desk. The palace issued an official statement. In a matter of moments, broadcasters altered their schedules. Reporters gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Phone screens, headlines, and live news feeds all converged on the same decision, one that had been quietly signed just hours earlier. Public opinion immediately split in two. One side argued that the crown had waited too long to draw a clear line. The other felt the decision was too harsh, too cold, risking turning a family conflict into an irreparable rift. Amidst all the debate, one image quickly became the defining symbol of that morning. A newspaper held up near the railings of Buckingham Palace. The front page bore a brief message. The royal family closes the door. No further words were needed. For those following the story, the meaning was all too clear. An institutional door had been shut. Harry watched the news in silence. Meghan sat nearby. As commentators began to argue over whether she had won or lost, Meghan picked up the remote and turned down the volume. She reminded Harry that they had made their choice. No lawsuits, no continuing the fight. Harry nodded. But acceptance did not make the pain vanish. Elsewhere, William received reports that the public reaction was stronger than anticipated. He did not ask his team to issue a rebuttal, nor did he permit any language that smacked of celebration. In William's view, if the goal of the decision was to set boundaries for the crown's future, the palace must not turn it into a victory lap over Harry and Meghan. Charles did not even sit before a screen to watch those headlines unfold. He left his office and went to his private chapel. Outside, the nation debated who was right and who was wrong. Inside, the king found only silence. When Charles returned, a brief message from Harry awaited him. Meghan would not contest the decree. The decision was final. There would be no legal battle ahead, no final negotiation waiting to be reopened. Yet there was no sense of victory. Princess Anne met with Charles in the pre-dawn hours. She said the decision was necessary. Charles did not answer immediately, and Anne added one more thing. Necessary did not mean painless. Perhaps that was the most accurate description of what each of them was left with after that night. Charles had defended the boundary he believed the crown required. But the distance between him and Harry had likely widened. Meghan lost the official recognition she had once held. But in return, she stepped away from a conflict that had dragged on far too long. Harry could not change his father's decision, but he chose to stand by his wife and child, accepting that his family's future lay outside the formal royal structure. William secured a clear principle for the future, but he also had to witness the cost that clarity exacted on the family. Anne upheld the consistency of the crown, but even she did not pretend that being right in principle could erase the hurt. And in the end, the Midnight Decree produced no true winner. It merely drew a line. On one side, family. On the other, the institution. On one side, bonds that no document could sever. On the other, the authority that the crown refused to leave in a state of ambiguity. As the sun rises higher over London, the question is no longer what Meghan has lost. It is rather the price Charles had to pay to make that decision. If a king is forced to choose between the clarity of the crown and the chance to reconcile with his own son, has Charles protected the monarchy, or has he just closed the final door on his family? Do you think this decision was necessary, or did it go too far? Share your thoughts below. And if you want to keep following stories of royal power secrets and decisions made behind palace doors, don't forget to subscribe and join us for future videos.